Welcome. Welcome, everybody. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this event with Wynton Marsalis on Artists as Entrepreneurs. My name is Mihir Desai. I'm a professor of finance at the Business School and the Senior Associate Dean for University Affairs. Before we get started, I thought I would just quickly introduce, for those of you who are new to the iLab, and introduce this idea of artists as entrepreneurs, and then dive on into letting Wynton and our panelists share some thoughts about this topic. So, just to begin, this is the iLab, and just a little bit about that. Wynton, for some of you who were there last night, gave a remarkable performance called Meet Me at the Crossroads. And in that performance, he really elucidated the nature of American musical tradition and how different traditions are actually not so distinct, but actually feed on each other and share an amazing amount. And it was really a striking lecture/performance. But for Harvard, this is our crossroads. It's meant to be our crossroads. It's a truly pan-university effort to focus different schools and all the resources at Harvard on innovation. And that's where we are here today at the iLab and our own very crossroads. It's also a crossroads of a different type between the community and Harvard. We're in some sense on the edge of the Harvard campus in Allston, and there are great things that will happen in Allston, and the iLab is one manifestation of what is much to come, and also a manifestation of how the community in Allston and Harvard grow from each other, just like all the musical traditions you talked about last night. So the second piece of the iLab thing I want to talk about is that, Laurie Gross and Mukti Khaire, who's one of our panelists, and I were having lunch several months ago. We were talking about how to get the iLab integrated with cultural events at Harvard. And it became clear as we were talking that there was tremendous scope for thinking about artists as entrepreneurs. And as we started to develop that theme, it became clear that that meant three things, at least to us. So the first thing that meant was entrepreneurs are always in search of ideas, and artists have a knack with creativity and original thinking, which entrepreneurs can learn from. So there's a tremendous amount for entrepreneurs to learn from the creative process that Wynton, for example, outlined last night. In part, for example, that arbitrage across traditions is something that we think about when we talk about coming up with new ideas for businesses. When we think about improvisation, the nature of improvisation in our classrooms, the nature of improvisation in business, and of course the nature of improvisation in music. So the first piece of that was just literally entrepreneurs can learn a tremendous amount from artists in that creative process. The second theme that became apparent was, artists are in many ways entrepreneurs. So what do we mean by that? If you think about entrepreneurship as the pursuit of opportunities without regard to resources under current control, that is what artists do. So that is another way of saying without having anything. And that's what artists do. They build a persona, they build a repertoire way beyond what they can currently imagine. And that's certainly what people like Wynton have done and what artists do every day. So there's an aspect to the artistic life which is about being an entrepreneur. And then the third manifestation of this idea of artist as entrepreneur is about organizations and institutions, which is creating not just your own personal style and brand and repertoire, but art in many ways is a very collaborative enterprise, and certainly Wynton's art is a collaborative enterprise, and so that means building a team, and that means building an organization, and that means running that organization in many, many ways. So those are the three ideas we had in thinking about artists as entrepreneurs. So that is the goal of this. What we're hoping to do is create a series of lectures and events on artists as entrepreneurs to highlight that idea for all of us. As Laurie and I were talking about it, it became clear that we could have imagined no one better to have the kickoff event for that notion of artists as entrepreneurs than Wynton Marsalis. And he's been introduced many times over the last 24 hours. And so I will not try to outdo Skip Gates' last night's introduction. But I will just highlight a few things for all of you. The first is, of course, the kind of creative and artistic genius of Wynton Marsalis, which has been talked a great deal about, and I don't think I have to convince you all about. Suffice it to say, remarkable 9 Grammys. There are endless numbers of musical awards, but what is striking to me is the diversity of what he has accomplished creatively and artistically. So Grammys in both jazz and classical. He's written at least 4 or 5 books. He's won a Pulitzer for his oratorio. It is a diversity that is striking by any artistic standard. And I think what is what is striking to me is not the accomplishment in one domain, but his ability to accomplish so much across various artistic domains. The second thing I should just highlight about his background is, and this was true last night for sure, as a public exponent for American cultural tradition, it is hard to think of someone better. And he manifested that last night in a remarkable way in talking about not just American music, not just jazz, but about American culture, broadly speaking. And he has done that through his educational efforts, in various documentaries. He's really becoming, and has become, I think, the best spokesman in many ways for the American cultural tradition that we have. And then the third thing I just want to highlight for our purposes here is he's an institution builder. He's a very serious institution builder. And so if you think about what he has done at Lincoln Center, which I guess began 25 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, as just an idea, which was to create an institution for an amazing American musical tradition at the heart of one of the greatest cultural institutions in the country, which is Lincoln Center. And from 25 years ago, that idea germinated into a program. And for those of you who have been down there, I've been there many times to see shows, a remarkable venue, which is the Rose Hall, and these two associated spaces. So he has created an institution, which I think is something, again, to go to how he is as an entrepreneur is really something remarkable. So before I let Wynton, I'm just going to introduce everybody on the panel. And in the interest of getting all the introductions out of the way, furthest to my right is Nancy Kane, who's the James Robeson Professor of Business Administration, a remarkable scholar and teacher, a historian by training. Nancy has written books on entrepreneurship and leadership and profiled some of the most amazing entrepreneurs in the world, from Wedgwood to Dell to Bono to Oprah Winfrey, and has case studies on all those people. Most recently, you might have seen her, I thought, really striking opinion in the New York Times on Christmas Day on leadership and on Shackleton, Ernest Shackleton, and the lessons of leadership from that experience. To her left, we have Mukti Khare, who is a wonderful associate professor here at the business school and who has germinated this idea with Lori, and has really, her work has really taught us a great deal about the interaction of culture and commerce, and really how culture and commerce are closer than one might think. And so she's done a great deal of work on that and is teaching a second-year elective at the business school on that topic. And to my immediate right is Rohit Deshpande, who is the Sebastian Kresge Professor of Business Administration and an expert in global marketing, and has written widely on topics of brand building, on international marketing, and I think this entire notion of creative industries and brands in creative industries, and for artists, personal brands, is something that Rohit has thought a great deal about, and he's thought about how to do that internationally. How do you take that brand and go international? And that's of particular relevance because Jazz at Lincoln Center has been exploring global efforts, which maybe Wynton can tell us a little bit about, and questions of how you take jazz, which is such a quintessentially American thing, and make it a global endeavor is something that Rohit can help us talk about. So we're going to try to make this as conversational as possible and get your questions as well. We're going to start with Wynton, talking a little bit about artists as entrepreneurs and about his efforts at Jazz at Lincoln Center. And what we're then going to do is, in some sense, just go down the row and have Nancy get us started by thinking about leadership, the leadership of artist entrepreneurs and what we can learn from the leadership of artist entrepreneurs. Mukti talking about the links between culture and commerce, and then Rohit talking about personal brand building and global brand building. And all along the way, we're going to try to make this as conversational as possible. One of the highlights last night was when Wynton, I thought one of the there were many highlights, but one of the highlights was when Wynton, I think, went off script and talked to the entire band about different ways in which the blues and musical traditions can be sacred and profane at the same time. So we're gonna try to do that as much as possible here as well. So Wynton, welcome to the iLab, welcome to Harvard Business School, and maybe you can get us started.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'm going to start by address the 3 points that you outlined. I don't know what to call them. The relationship of artists to entrepreneurial ideas. Of course, there's an artist as an entrepreneur when you actually have you're trying to sell an idea or some music to some type of business unit like a record company, And there are the many experiences that you have when you're talking to people who really have no interest in the music or the art, and you have to sell them on that idea just so they can put it out and then go on to not sell it. That's generally what happens if you're serious about your art. When there was a music industry, that would generally be the type of relationship you had with the people you would work with. It was never malicious or mean-spirited. It's just that many times what you're thinking about is outside of the range of the way that they think of your art as a product. But then, of course, there's the relationship of the ideas. So I'll go into the relationship of those ideas and use the 3 points. The first is the spark of innovation, the thought, the creativity. And if we look at the many artists that have existed across history, we see many types of innovators. Sometimes we see a person who's great and who just slowly unrolls a concept. Brahms would be an example of someone coming in the shadow of Beethoven. He just loved Beethoven. He worked on his music, and he worked on, he's 40-something years old, 45 years old, writing his first symphony. And you have somebody like Mozart who was just 6 years old and great. Didn't make a difference what he did or touched. It was going to have the mark of genius and inspiration and the creativity. And you have somebody like Duke Ellington who also, he just kind of, he rolled his way into his ideas. I think for the purposes of our conversation, Duke Ellington would be the best person to use in terms of that type of creative innovator that comes up with an idea. And I'll just explain what Duke Ellington's idea was. He was a guy in Washington, D.C., who was an okay musician in the beginning, not like a prodigy, not 14 or 15 and everybody saying he's great like Louis Armstrong was. The first thing he realized, he was a piano player, he would go on gigs. And he was sent on a gig by a gentleman, I don't remember his name, but he noticed that he was paid the gig paid $100, and Duke was paid $10 of it, and he gave the other 90 to the one that sent him on the job. He said, man, I need to start sending people on jobs. So when he was 19 years old, he founded his own company, sending people on jobs. He took out an ad. That ad still exists in the telephone directory. It said, Duke Ellington, I'll send bands out. So he began sending bands out. Then he realized he liked playing, and he realized that girls like musicians.
Smart man.
So, he said, hey, if I really learn how to play, girls will like me. He started to study the tradition. He was a person who had he was a likable person. Wherever he went, people liked him. He was able to get jobs. His personality did more for him at that point than his musicianship. He moved to New York. Now he's 24, 25 years old. Fats Waller takes his place on a gig. Of course, people would rather play with Fats Waller than Duke Ellington. His own band would rather play with Fats Waller. Something happened with Fats. They said, hey, we don't like the way Duke plays, but let's call him because we like him. Duke comes back with the Washingtonians, gets a job in the Kentucky Club. Now his musical genius starts to manifest itself. He realizes, up to this point, everybody's playing a kind of society music with the saxophones playing doo-dee-doo-doo, real staid kind of. All of a sudden he hears New Orleans music, and they play doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. And Duke says, if I put these two musics together, I'll create something that the world has never heard. That's the foundation of his genius. How can I take what's known as sweet music and put it with hot music? What does he do? He immediately hires 3 musicians from New Orleans. This is just a guy from Washington who 5 years ago was booking bands. Now he looks at his band, Sidney Bechet is playing. He's the greatest exponent of New Orleans clarinet. Wellman Bro is playing bass. He has Barney Bigard. So he has the bottom from New Orleans. He has a clarinet player from New Orleans. He has Bubba Miley, who was a guy not from New Orleans, but who plays like the great New Orleans innovator King Oliver. And he still has the other members of his band who play in the sweet style. Throughout his career, we see Duke Ellington always taking different aspects of music, combining them. So that's an example of the type of innovative thinking that I think deals with a lot of kind of American business. We have more. That's why when you see the question of many of the great entrepreneurs in this time, there's always some long trail of people who say that person stole my idea. Okay, in Duke Ellington's band,
We're familiar with that already.
right? Yeah, of course, but this is not new.
Yeah.
Okay, Duke Ellington's band, they were always saying Duke stole this tune from this guy. This guy played a riff. This takes me to the second part of that. Yes, Duke Ellington would hear somebody warming up with a theme, or he would hear some, and he would write a tune on that. That theme was not a tune, and it would never have become a tune were it not for Duke Ellington. So Duke would take some idea, give a musician who played it, a composer credit, and he made it into a composition. So that takes us into the next phase, and that is, how do you take an idea and without resources turn it into something that has some type of meaning? This is another thing that separated Duke Ellington from other people. He so believed in his music that he would sacrifice whatever he had to sacrifice for that music to be right. And the first thing he sacrificed was time. When everybody else was sleeping, he was up. So some theme or tune that somebody might play, Duke Ellington was up till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning making that into a song, a composition. He figured out how to develop the technology to go from dee-doo-doo-doo, dee-dee-dee-dee, something that, dee-doo-doo-doo, dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, da-do-do-boo-dee. Then the band, dee-doo-doo-dee-dee-dee, dee-doo-doo-dee-doo-doo. He figured out how to orchestrate New Orleans counterpoint, which nobody even understood at that time. He figured out an innovative conception of harmony based on the blues. Now all of a sudden he's distancing himself from that person with that idea. Because while I can play idea on the trumpet, I have no idea of what New Orleans counterpoint is. So he then begins to accrue and get members of his band and people around him who can help him realize his music. In comes his manager, Irvin Mills. Irvin Mills is putting Duke Ellington in a position that no one would ever put an Afro-American artist in at that time. First thing he was saying, this man is an artist. He was selling Duke, he was taking the resources, and Duke was figuring out how to sell to Irving his idea of the music. Now, Irvin Mills was also a musician, so he understood Duke Ellington truly is a genius. Unfortunately, he's trapped in the social mores of this time. But Duke Ellington then was treated in a way no one else was treated. Okay, so the third thing would be, how do you actually get many people around you? Duke Ellington, by the end of his life, there were Duke Ellington societies all over the world. There were people who would do anything for Duke Ellington in his music. And there were people who are not musicians. And that is because Duke Ellington, first, he stuck to his mission, so people could figure out who he was. And his mission was broad enough to accommodate the many changes that took place. That his music was transformed many times because his foundation was foundational. And what I mean by that is that what he had at the bottom was rich. It wasn't like some fad or some type of thing that wasn't like a pet rock or disco music or something that just came in and you were able to capitalize on it. It was hot versus sweet music, something that goes back to the human personality. And then he was able to take his personality that helped him in the first instance and use his likability and his knowledge and insight to get people around him and say, hey, this is the issue. The issue is this music, and this is what we can do with the music. This is what the music is about. And he, as he grew older, was also a conservator of the history of the music. So Duke could play the stride piano style. He actually grew up with the music. And at the end of his life in 1970, 71, well, he died in 74, but this is kind of late Duke Ellington compositions. He wrote a piece called the New Orleans Suite for the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. And in that piece, we can see that Duke Ellington, after 50 sustained years of development, the longest history I know of, in the longest development in the history of music, just in terms of from the beginning to the end, just clear development, he's still iterating those very basic fundamentals, New Orleans music. The clarinet at the top, the trombone, playing in the second line parade, the trumpet. In a lot of ways, it's like Beethoven in his last quartets. That last F major quartet he's writing is like Haydn's music. So he's going back to the beginning. And I think that in concluding what I'm saying, I know it's rather lengthy, excuse me, I just wanted to cover those things, is that I feel like that's the way we can use the arts and an artist to delve into solutions to problems, business problems that we may confront.
That's great. So there are many things I'd love to respond to, but I'm going to hold myself in the interest of making sure we get everybody participating here. So Nancy, why don't you get us started?
Okay, a couple of flashes. First, you need to join our faculty right away. Second, seriously, right? We want them on the faculty, right? You're natural. Secondly, that's the Duke Ellington story. It's a story. You know, the power of storytelling has never been more important. Is also a fabulous case study, right? It would make a great case study, not just in Mukti's course, but in our first year entrepreneurship course. Third, I'm reminded when Wynton speaks and when you get to know what he's done on his journey, of something that an American comedian and folk singer once said about Mozart, a guy named Tom Lehrer in the 1960s. He said, it's a sobering thing to realize that when Mozart was my age, he had been dead 3 years, right? And there's a bit of the wonderkind right here, and it's just very heartening. Fourth, hallelujah that we're all here and privileged to be here on this very integrative, very mixing it up, very, very special and meaningful day. I teach the history of leadership. I teach a university-wide course on this. We start with Henry V, and we end with Mark Zuckerberg, and we cover Bono and Frederick Douglass and Dietrich Bonhoeffer and John Rockefeller and Oprah Winfrey and also Madam Walker and all kinds of interesting folks. And I'm reminded when I think about what Wynton's done and when I listen to you speak with the power of your presence, of something that the American novelist once wrote about leadership, David Foster Wallace, who wrote a lot of prose in between writing these astoundingly complex novels with sentences with 107 words in them, like Infinite Jest. He said, real leaders are people who get us to do better, harder, smarter, and more important things than we can get ourselves to do on our own, because they help us overcome the limitations of our own weaknesses and our selfishness and our fears. And if we think about artistic endeavor, the creation of people like Duke Ellington or Beethoven or Bono or George Eliot or Vermeer, we are faced with a variety of attributes that it seems to me at this moment in history have never been more important to effective leadership. So as a historian, who, means I get paid to read other people's mail, and it means we don't have a lot of guests in my class because most of them are dead. I think a lot about what is interesting and powerful about the big arc, about our moment in the context of the big arc of history. And here's what I would say about this moment. Conscious that every moment is rife with change, I would say that the scale and the pace of turbulence in our world right now are really unprecedented. And I won't go into these details, it's not the time or place, but I would bet my horse, I would bet my boot collection, I would bet a lot of things that are very dear to me on this. I would say it more succinctly that I think turbulence is the new normal. And I think our search in lots of ways through neoclassical economics and financial journalism and the politics, the fractured politics of our society right now, is at some level an indirect and unacknowledged nostalgic quest for a kind of punctuated equilibrium socially and economically and psychologically that is simply no longer. So if turbulence is the new normal, what does that mean for leadership today? And what does leadership take from great art and the people who make it? So a couple of flashes on this. If turbulence is the new normal, then we're going to need great imagination. We're going to need to imagine all kinds of, not just solutions to the fires we have to fight every day, but looking beyond the fires and our smartphones and up into the future and into thriving and into what Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. We're going to need a great sense of what Wynton so eloquently described as Ellington's ability to mix it up, to cut and paste across disciplines, to take from theology and painting and music and poetry and not just technology and not just the left sides of our brain to deal with problems that truly no longer come in anything like functional or nifty discipline-based buckets. It means we're going to have to teach the ability of humility and distillation. Distillation. What do artists do? They distill. They sit with all that discomfort, right? Because you create when the pain of not creating is greater than the pain of actually putting your pencil to the score lines, right? And we're going to need people that can distill see through the emails and the inboxes and all the apps on our iPhone, which are distracting us much of the time, and see what matters. Beauty and truth and justice. It's not that complicated, and move us toward that. We're going to need people, perhaps most importantly, and again, the arts are all about this, that understand that it's never just the left side, it's never just the right side, it's moving between and through those parts of our minds and very much into our core, and finally, and our heart, and finally, to go back to something that Wynton said about Duke Ellington, that can keep finding the faith, right? The trust in our own courage and in our own courage muscles to take the harder road sometimes, to do something more than react, to do something more than survive, to move us toward thriving. And all artists worth their salt, whether they become commercially successful or not, find that faith or they don't get right with themselves. So finally, and this, I'm stealing this line unabashedly from one of the Church of England prelates at the royal wedding last April, which I'm not a royal watcher, but I did see it. And one of the bishops said, I can't remember his name, he said, the problems and promise of the 21st century will not be solved by information at all. They will be solved, and this is the great gauntlet that all art picks up over and over again. They will be solved by the translation of information into knowledge, knowledge into understanding, and understanding into wisdom. Bring it on. More art, more integration. Mix it up. Onward, upward.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Mercy.
Should we keep going, Wynton, or you want to comment on that?
I would like to, I don't want to hog the time, but I would like to comment on
Yeah,
a couple
sure.
of the beauty of what you were saying. The first thing is of all of those, understanding the leading line, understanding knowledge to wisdom is the digestion of experience. One thing about Duke Ellington is, and about music, is that it's all experiential. You have to be able to play. You can talk and you can talk. Some musicians can't say 2 words, but they can play. And there's a book by Sidney Bechet called Treated Gentle. And he builds this book up and he starts to talk about what makes somebody great. Sidney Bechet became a national hero in France as an older man. He's from New Orleans. He was a kid genius. He could play the New Orleans style and play with more passion than any musician who ever lived. Duke Ellington, to his dying day, said the greatest musician he ever encountered was Sidney Bechet. Sidney Bechet went to jail because he got into a gunfight with a gentleman in Paris over the chord changes to a song. They started arguing over the harmonies, and then he got deported and I'm serious. He spent jail time in England. There are pictures of Sidney Bechet on a coal cart in Russia in 1918 or 1919 with his horn. So he's one of the most serious people that ever lived. And his wedding in France was a national holiday. Everybody celebrated and loved Sidney. But Sidney was a wildcat. Like you couldn't control him. He did what he wanted to do. Like he was chaos himself. If you were just with him, he was chaotic. And he once in his book, it's an unbelievably poetic book. And he says, you want to know why Louis Armstrong and Lorenzo Tio and Buddy Bolden, he starts naming all these greatest musicians. You want to know why they could play? And he builds it up. You're thinking, he said, I'm going to tell you why they could play. Because they could, that's why. And it's, so a lot of times, something I noticed when I was in conservatories is people practice 8-9 hours a day. A lot of intense individualistic practicing. You figure out things, but it's also a sign of a type of mental illness, which doesn't mean that you don't come up with something good. It doesn't mean you don't become a virtuoso, but it means that you'll sit in a room and play the same passage for 3 hours. It's curious. Duke Ellington didn't do that. So there's a way of business. There's a certain type of person that has emerged now that has like a touch of Asperger's. It's not Asperger's. It's not bad. I'm not making a judgment. I'm just saying that the connection with people is not there, but the ability to do calculations and to figure out things they have in abundance. the understanding and the way of dealing with order and everything having to be ordered. There's a sense of achievement in order. Many times we are taught how to deal with order and form as if form is some type of enemy that we, now in jazz it's the opposite, because we live in chaos. We embrace chaos. That's what our music is. It is a harmony through conflict. So Duke Ellington's band, one person, there are tapes of his band where one guy in the band is sleeping through the whole gig. One other guy is counting, is looking at his train ticket while they're playing or figuring out something. Two grown men in their 60s get into a fight on the bus. Before, and the one thing that the musicians would always say is Duke Ellington had the most undisciplined band in the world. But boy, when he looked at them and said, it's time to play, you never heard anything like that, ever. And we'll never hear anything like that again, because that band was together for 35, 40 years. And so I think the whole thing of chaos in our band, we have a saying, we call it the American classic. That's for people who've had such an extreme dysfunctional upbringing that it makes them able to adapt to unlivable circumstances with tremendous ease. So when we talk about him, we say, what is he like? Oh, you know, it's a classic. He got the good American, got the good American classic upbringing. And you're always looking for an American classic. And that's regardless of hue. We started it talking about mainly the black musicians, but then we got some of our white brothers who came into the band and we said, oh, he's a classic. So the thing of coming together with people and being able to ride, we call it riding the wave of craziness, to find that calm and that still that's in the middle of all that chaos.
Absolutely.
So for me, I actually love chaos. Like when I write music, I turn the TV on. I have people in my house all the time. I like fights. Somebody start fighting, I'm like, okay, we getting to something now. Now I can actually understand you. If somebody gets real mad and start cursing and screaming, you speaking my language now. So, you know, I relate to that, those ideas.
That's great. So let me turn it over to Mukti Khairi now.
So clearly, I'm not in the improvisation mode. I came with notes, and as you can see, who is very clear. Who's the jazz musician here? For the longest time, if you were in the business school faculty and studied stuff like culture, it was strange because culture and creativity and art were these things that were outside of the market and outside of this purview of firms and this is many people may have seen this book, but this The Gift is one of those books that defined it and put a stamp on that permanently, so saying that creativity and the creative pursuit is a gift from the creator to the rest of the world, and a market value cannot be put in it, and as soon as you start getting into that, then it's not real, it's not art, and this view prevailed for a long time, and so the word artist and entrepreneur was rarely put together in a complementary way, particularly by artists, and it's ironic because as Mihir was talking, and if you look at artists and entrepreneurs, there's actually a lot of similarities there. There's the perseverance needed to actually bring that vision to fruition and take it to and create it and execute on it. And that's part of what the gift we'll talk about. That's the gift that artists give. But the perseverance, the being driven by something that's not easily measurable in tangible terms, by non-monetary motivations, which is often a commonality between artists and entrepreneurs, and the joy of creating something new, creating something that you believed in, the sort of fundamentals that Wynton just talked about, of having that feeling that this is something I believe in and this is something I can create, and there are these similarities, but still wasn't necessarily seen as a real phenomenon when until recently. And recently, I think, to Nancy's point earlier, just given the immense changes happening around us, artists have sort of had to say, let's take matters in our own hand. People who care about these things, people who care about all of the extra thinking the kind of, again, the right side thinking that exposure to art can motivate, can cause in the younger generations, in the people who are going to be leading us going forward, has caused artists to say, okay, if I need to take matters in my own hand, and we have examples, and I'm saying this so that right after this you will talk a little bit about Jazz at Lincoln Center and this effort to take art out of the sort of hallowed halls of, the artist is untouchable and should sort of work in this nice little most artists will say, I need to, it's the sole genius image of an artist that is often, as Vinton has just pointed out, not necessarily true. There is a greater need to bring more people into the fold, and the Jazz at Lincoln Center is a great example of these kinds of organizations that have tried to bridge that gap between the so-called world of firms and commerce that's seen as separate from the world of artists. And not all these organizations are necessarily started by artists, but definitely at least by lovers of art. These are the ones trying to create meaning and value, the way you talked about Duke Ellington, in the art that is being fostered, and explaining to society that to combat the sort of decline, something is happening in this, isn't it? Thank you. That's the day I remember when Wynton Marsalis adjusts a mic for me. Yeah, somebody take a picture and send it to me. That stays in my head. And the sound is better. Who would have thought? So, and I think what I really would love to hear from Wynton is how do you bridge that supposed gap between this notion of it should be a gift, it should be given, versus a notion of a goal-driven, I have a vision, I need to put that out there, as opposed to, I'm just going to create art for art's sake. And is that an artistic endeavor? Is that a social endeavor? I think it's both. I think we cannot distinguish between the two. But how do you keep that alive? I think that's the...
Well, I think that, let's just start just as a musician or as an artist.
Yeah.
My father's a musician, so I grew up with, he's a local musician in New Orleans. He could play, but he struggled financially, never made money. When I was at home, I was always playing in clubs. It'd be like 15 people. The same 15 people saw him play from 1963 to 1975.
Yeah.
But he believed in his music, and he believed in playing. And I learned so much from him, watching him, more than him talking, just the type of integrity he had. So the first thing I think that brings people together is integrity. When you have integrity, people come to you.
Yeah.
Now for me, I was speaking earlier about Duke Ellington and Irving Mills. Most artists, if you're lucky enough to get a record contract or play, you have a manager. It's very important that you have a good relationship with that manager. I met my manager when I was 19. He's here today. He went to Harvard. He graduated from the business school. But the type of respect and love I have for him, I can't explain to someone. Because it's been so many years of he and I. He's the first one started teaching me about business. He said, man, you think you're smart? Here, take this test. And now I'm 50. Okay, I was 19 then. I was 19 then. But I have a young man that's my assistant, Jono. He's sitting there. He's 25, 26. He's a kid. And we were talking just yesterday. I said, man, you need to get a line of business that you are responsible for, and you have to do everything around that business, and that will help you much more than being with me. Because I'm teaching you about music. He's a trumpet player, so we have the whole kind of trumpet thing. We have things that we do. But for him to grow and mature and develop his vision, there are things he has to do for himself, to put himself in the position to develop all of the skills he wants to develop. My manager did the same thing for me, where he would say, study this, look at this deal, what do you think about this? Here's this contract, we're gonna take each paragraph of this contract and break it down to a sentence, and we're gonna discuss it and go through these things. Here's what this means, what do you think about that? Even 2 weeks ago, he called me with some test that he had a bet with somebody that I would get the test right, a math test. I luckily got it right. It was just luck. But I think that artists, many times, in the kind of artist-manager relationship, you develop kind of an understanding with that primary relationship if you're interested in doing it. The artists of the 19th century, they had to hustle. Like somebody like Richard Wagner. You read about him, he struggled and hustled his entire life to get his operas produced, to get his big production. So I think that it's important to kind of put yourself in the context of the history, and then realize that today, for the contemporary artist, that a score is a business plan. A score is a business plan. I tell, in meetings, I have, speaking about finances, I look at a spreadsheet and I say that when you look at this spreadsheet, you have to understand that everyone here needs to understand every number on this spreadsheet. So why? Because there's not a conductor in the world that gets the score of the Rite of Spring and goes, wow, there are a lot of notes here. You don't sit in front of an orchestra with a score and say, well, I don't understand these 20 measures, but we'll make it through that okay. If you have to sit down at a piano and you have to figure out every harmony and you have to figure out what the progressions are, and you have to, that's what you have to do. And that a score is, you have to, another thing about scores is a sheet of music paper, that initial sheet is the most efficient document ever developed in the West. Just by a glance at that front page, what do you know? You know what tempo it is. You know who wrote it. You know roughly when it was written. You know all the dynamic layout of what's going to be played. You know all of the instruments who are going to play. You know what keys they all are in. You know what the vertical harmonies are. You understand the horizontal contrapuntal motion of each of those lines.
Let me just point out, you know, I don't. But
I mean, just, you know, just musicians, you have to.
yeah.
Then let's talk about how the score unfolds. Now let's talk about you, from you thinking, I will write a symphony.
Yeah.
It will have X number of movements. Each movement will encompass these ideas. Okay, so that in itself is your larger yearly business plan. Now you have to break it down into quarters. Each movement is a quarter. This is what I'm going to achieve with this quarter, this quarter. Now each quarter is broken down into months. I want these sections in this movement. Then it's broken down into weeks. It's broken down into days. I want these instruments to play. These are the main themes. And you have to account for, if you write a symphonic piece that has, let's say once there's a piece that I wrote that had like 75 people playing. I have to account for what all 75 of those people are going to do for 45 minutes. You ever think about what a bassoon does for 45 minutes? Let me tell you, I would literally go for like, I think I literally spent, not exaggerating, I have a witness, it's like 20 hours a day for like 6 months. Literally, like, I would just be looking at it like, what? So much that my son got up one morning at like 4 or 5 and just sat next to me like this, just looking. Saying, man, if I wouldn't have seen this, I wouldn't believe it. I'd be like, man, I have to figure out what to do with this damn bassoon. So, you know, musicians have to deal with specificity, which business is about on a certain level. We're always given inspiration. Yeah, you know, inspiration is great. Hindemith said it the best. He said, he was talking about musicians who didn't know anything. He said, must not this impulse and feeling be tiny if it manifests itself in such little knowledge? So I always think, yeah, you know, you got to go with what you know. But my father used to always say, if you don't know these chords, it means you're not really interested in playing. So, you know, knowledge is, and you can believe it, if you start listing all those great artists, you start with Bach and Beethoven and Wagner, and you get down to Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong, just his accuracy over 50 years is unbelievable. I once sat up with a guy, and I'm going to stop talking, I just want to talk about Louis Armstrong for 1 second, about his accuracy. I once sat up with a guy in London, a friend of mine, and we looked at tapes of Louis Armstrong all night. He had some collection of pops. I could see Louis Armstrong sitting in at some TV show with somebody in Scotland, and Louis Armstrong, and then all of these tapes we saw of ours, maybe he missed 2 or 3 notes. He never missed one harmony, ever. And we were thinking, man, what about how accurate this guy is? Charlie Parker is another one. You can't believe the accuracy. So in that way, we have many tie-ins to metrics and to plans, and we're very scripted and structured in our art.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. All right, Rohit.
Thank you very much. It's a absolute pleasure to sit here next to you. Described last night as refined and sublime by my friend Skip Gates. I want to present two problems to you that have to do with branding and art, and specifically jazz, and make one observation. But I want to start with a story. So many of you might know this already, but the first course on jazz was taught at Harvard in 1974 by the very esteemed John Lewis from the Modern Jazz Quartet. And a student went up to Mr. Lewis and said, he asked him a question about a night in Tunisia. He said, why did Dizzy Gillespie write A Night in Tunisia? And John Lewis looked at him and smiled and said, well, he was glad to write it for a record date. Why did he write it? The best inspiration is to write for pay. So it kind of connects with your notion that people are thinking about commerce. Now, here are the two problems. Actually, maybe I'll make the observation first. Mihir, you said to talk a little bit about global issues and global branding. I happen to think, and maybe I'm way off on this, but I happen to think that jazz does not have a problem globalizing. In fact, I think of art and culture, jazz has perhaps transcended geographies better than pretty much anything else. I came across a very interesting quote by Nat Hentoff, who's local, as you might know. He's from Boston, got a graduate degree here at Harvard. He says he has this book called Jazz Is, wonderful book where he has quotes from jazz musicians over the years. And he says, jazz is international. Everybody knows that. Compellingly international. During the Second World War, a member of the French underground, who had been a jazz critic and discographer, was captured. He was brought to the Gestapo, but before the heavy questioning began, a German officer, also a jazz discographer, got into an abstruse, intense conversation with the captive about the debatable personnel on a rare Bessie Smith recording. Jazz is international. And in fact, at times that black jazz musicians were perhaps not as welcome in many clubs in the US, they found a home in France. Sidney Bechet made a home in Paris. Archie Shepp made a home in Paris. So I think, so I'm actually very bullish on JLC Oman. I think it transcends. Here are the two problems. The first one I'll call accidental branding. One of the things that I teach a course for entrepreneurs here at the business school in a program called Owner President Management Program. Maybe about 600 entrepreneurs, mostly family-owned businesses, very successful, financially very successful. But their common problem, they tell me, is one of branding. They really don't know how to brand themselves. They want to be unique. They want to distinguish themselves in competitive space, but branding themselves is something that they don't know a lot about. And so they accidentally brand themselves. They get known for things sometimes that they're not very happy being known for. And I think this is an issue with artists. It's accidental branding rather than a discipline of branding. I'm actually working on a case now on one of our students on personal branding. It's Tyra Banks and how she's measured it. So one is, how do you get over this accidental branding? Who's done a really great job in jazz? And the second is what I'll call the Cadillac problem. I'm on the board of a repertory company here, the ART, the American Repertory Theater, here in Cambridge. It's part of Harvard, as you probably know. they have this issue. Their traditional dependence is on a group of subscribers. It's a subscription model, right? So they get cash flow up front because these are people who pay for season tickets, right? So they have the money coming in. The problem, I don't know how many of you know this, but the average age of the American theater goer is 60. 60.
Yeah, and try classical music, try symphony.
So they're literally dying, right? So ART has I don't know. ART has this issue that a lot of cultural organizations have, which is how do you attract a younger audience? Well, now the younger audience, the competitive space for the ART is not other theaters, other repertory theaters. It's rock concerts.
Yeah.
That's what young people go, it's rock concerts. Rock concerts are one-offs. So the ART has a branding issue. They had a very successful production of George Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, as you might remember from last season, right? The branding issue is, do you brand Porgy and Bess? Do you brand ART? So in this case, it would be Jazz Lincoln Center. Or do you brand Audra McDonald, the star? She played Bess. Kind of where do you do the branding? Because this is the Cadillac issue. Let me stop there.
Okay, well, I just want to talk about just the question of accidental branding. I mean, I was branded for years, not like how I was at all. So many times when I would go places, people would say, "Man, we didn't know you were like that." Damn, you like a dude from the hood or something. Because I played classical music, I had glasses, whatever, you look a certain way. I didn't understand. You put glasses on, you're a different person. You put a suit on, you're different from what you are. You like classical music, that makes you be a certain type of person. Jazz Lincoln Center and jazz itself has a problem with branding because no one knows what it is. It's the only art ever that as time passes, its name becomes less clear. It's the only art that has a body of people around it who want it not to be itself. And I'll give you an example. As a classical musician, I knew that if I played a classical concert, the question would be, can I play this music well? If I played the music well, then I would be critiqued, something about my playing, something about Haydn, something about the orchestra. That's the general critique will go, I liked it, I didn't like it. Now, jazz poses a very different question. First, you have to figure out what it is. My father played jazz, but the style of jazz he played was not the style of jazz we played. We played more funk, pop music. Now, would we rather play his style, which was hard for us to play, and you had to know a lot of music, or would we rather play our style, which is funk, and you don't have to know that as much? Well, we don't want to play like them. We play like we play. So there's the first fundamental breakdown in our music. Now, what's the difference between those two musics? Jazz features a walking bass and the swinging drums. Now, this is John Lewis. You were talking about him earlier. He was one of my greatest mentors. I actually almost got full when you said his name. I would go to his house so many times and just sit up and talk with him. He was an unbelievable man of such intensity of intelligence and such vibrancy in life. And he would always tell me, when you got to watch playing a lot of Latin music. You have to watch playing all of these musics which don't have swing as the basis. And he says, not because I don't like Latin music. I love Latin music. It's not because I don't love music with ostinatos. I love those kind of music. It's that those musics will take over jazz music. Because jazz music is a very delicate thing. He said the difference between swing and these other rhythms is that swing provides the environment for you to tell the stories. That's why if you listen to solos in jazz, they always have a much more storyline, much more of a through line than solos in other styles of music. And that's true. The greatest through line stories have been played on the swing rhythm. So the swing rhythm in jazz, in the branding of jazz, is equated with older music. So as soon as you start swinging, regardless of what you're playing, it's automatically older. If you want it to not be older, you gotta put the funk pocket on it. Now, once you put that pocket on it, you're no longer playing jazz rhythm. And now the musicians have kind of escaped into a world music pocket. Okay, they don't mind something brown, just not Afro-American. So it's like now we're gonna do like some sad version of Indian rhythms.
Careful.
No, I'm talking about what we're doing. We'll do some sad version of Indian music, put a tabla drum on it, and play like an exotic scale on it and say, yeah, this is my world music. We're not dealing with the particulars of Indian music. We don't understand it. So our music suffers from the type of branding that comes when you have, when you don't have integrity. So when we first started the Jazz Lincoln Center Orchestra, I thought as an idea, it'd be great to get the Duke Ellington band members who are alive together and play with them. It was just a thought. We played a concert with kind of younger band. We were all in our late 20s, and they were all in their late 70s and early 80s. But I noticed the review was different type of attack. Like that review attack was, why are they playing Duke Ellington's music? I thought, hold on a second. Let's do 2 days of it next year. So we did 2 days of Duke's music. Then we were only doing 2 or 3 concerts a year. Then we did 2 days of Duke, and it was the same kind of anti-Duke Ellington. Why would somebody be mad about someone playing Duke Ellington's music? So part of the branding issue around jazz is that we can't figure out what the music is. What a majority of people think the music is actually instrumental pop music. So it hurts our brand internationally because the brand doesn't project with the type of integrity that the people who created it earned for us, like people like John Lewis. Okay, so that's the one issue. It's an issue that confronts jazz at Lincoln Center. And it confronts us in our house. Because let's say you may believe in the integrity of it, but if your definition is different from the definition of your field, your workforce is coming from your country. So naturally, a person who is a jazz fan of kind of instrumental pop jazz, if I'm having a dialogue with that person, they're saying, well, okay, we know you're a musician, but you're in the old school. The music can't stay where it was. It has to move to this new place. But they don't realize that when I was a kid, it was in that new place. And that new place was instrumental pop music. And to convert or to deal with your younger staff and try to teach them what the music means and understand how to hear it, that is a challenge. Then even if you can get your staff motivated for it, now you have to confront your critics, your educators in all of your schools who are miseducating all of your kids by teaching them this form of instrumental pop music. Because music, in a strange way, of all the subjects in American schooling, is the only subject that students come and teachers will tell you, I have to play what the kids want to play. I'm always saying, do the kids on the basketball team? Is the basketball coach, are they coming into basketball practice? Is it elective? Are they coming in saying, look, man, we're not running these drills today? You know, so that's the one. And the other thing about the globalization and the international, the image of jazz, people want jazz to have integrity. People around the world want the United States to have integrity. They want our business to mean integrity. They want us to represent something great. And we have an international movement. I recently went to Russia for the 50th birthday of my friend Igor Butman. The same, his father's a jazz musician like mine, his brother plays like mine. We played a big concert. His Russian big band has come to America and played with us, and we had a guy in our band who beat all of them in chess, so they're still angry. And you know, we talk about Russian music, American music. We've been growing up in the music, and we have a relationship, and musicians in France. I was recently in Paris last week for a show about cooking with a friend of mine, and I played with an all-French rhythm section, a guy named Hervé Cellon. Same, his father was a trumpet player. My father's a piano player. He plays piano, I play trumpet. So we were laughing about it as we played, but we've grown up playing with each other. So our music is international in the realest sense at this point, because now, unlike in the early days when Miles or Charlie Parker would meet people and they would see them, we now have generations of parents and enthusiasts who have been together. So when we meet, we already have a track record and a history of achievement. The most difficult thing for us to figure out how to do is how to project the truth of our mission, because our truth projects small. So whereas the truth of something you would never want in your house, it projects large. And I really don't know what the answer to that is. Somebody get a certain type of tattoo and put a certain thing in their nose, and somebody takes half their clothes off, and all of a sudden every camera in the world is on it and it's blown up. You don't want it at the kitchen table with you. If somebody comes in clean and talking something and tells you it's small. So I don't know how to solve that projection problem. That's the problem I have for you. When I leave, I'm going to call you and see if you come up with something for me. What can we do to project? And I'm really serious about it, John. What can we do to project something like that we have that is a big thing, but it projects very small? It's hard to get a big projection on it.
So there have been so many things that I think are beyond what we started when we talked about the links between artists as entrepreneurs that have come up in this conversation. You know, I think the whole notion of order out of chaos is something that we really think about in our classroom and that you talked about so eloquently. this notion of arbitraging things, finding the space between two traditions, the nature of discipline and the importance of discipline. I was really struck by what you said, and I have to say that's the most poetic description of a spreadsheet I've ever heard. So what I thought we could do is actually throw it open a little bit and have your questions, and if you'd like to ask a question, you can come up to the mic on this theme, and Wynton will address it, and we'll all hopefully chime in and use some time from the crowd as well. Great, go ahead.
Hello. Thank you for coming.
you.
I am actually one of the founding members of a school called the Collaborative Electronic Mixed Media Institute.
Oh, I love
We're a new art school in the area, and we're basically looking at teaching the art of science and the science of art. So half of our people are like MIT-trained engineers who can program a Kinect to have fractal patterns that are based on, the dancing of people who are playing to DJs who are the webmasters of BU's medical school that are also ours and that sort of thing. So it's this really, really, really chaotic environment. And what I'm kind of interested in is art as technology and technology as art, because I feel like what you were saying, this rigorously innovative approach to innovation in any field, I feel sort of works for if you're a tech startup, if you're a school, if you're trying to make your way out there as an artist. And in 3 months, we've gotten from having one class of 3 students to having 3 booked classes for next month, and we're growing and we're growing and we're growing. And I was wondering what kind of advice you would have for, having done all the Linker Center stuff, how do we sort of expand? How do we sort of go out there? And just in terms of, I want to answer for the sort of modest brand that you were talking about. As semi, we get to be really, really good at that because, I'm a semi-artist. I talk. I'm the one who introduces people. People are like semi-engineers because they use their engineering to do art, so that sort of thing.
Well, first, I like your presentation. I like you.
Thank you.
You use your hands good.
I'm European.
You're very expressive. You have a lot of enthusiasm and passion for what you're saying. I want to take a class, and I'm afraid of technology.
I'll be teaching independent film production next month. Please come.
He's an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
so
you gotta love him. I mean,
He's selling. He's selling.
Right, I love it. I mean, you got to. So I think as far as expanding, you lay your plan out as an idea and write it down, right? Just classic kind of business mission and vision. Now, I kind of argue with my friends about mission and vision. Mission, to me, is your largest thing that you want. Vision, some people say that the vision is how it will look to you, but to me, the vision is the quantifiable expression of that. And to me, that vision, the way I'm defining it, is as important as the mission. In other words, you say, I want to lose weight. Okay, you want to lose weight, I'm with you. That's your mission. Now, your vision is, I will run 2 miles a day for the next 3 weeks, and then 3, and the next month, and then 5. Well, now all of a sudden, you're going to lose weight.
We've been working on the vision statement for 2 months. That was the single most amazing piece of advice you could have given us. Thank you.
Yeah,
that
I
was
knew I
that was
liked
like unbelievably appropriate.
You do that, but then you start to get the mechanics around that. And you will find that for intellectuals, many times, it's much easier to plan than to do. There's something about that intellectual planning, boy, intellectual, great plan, but I was joking with John last night. I said, man, it's like we're on the battlefield, we have to say, look, you can write the book about this battle later, but we need people with weapons now. We're not having a discussion about this. We're getting ready to do this. And you have to kind of look at it. I don't want to give you a war analogy because it's in bad taste, but anything like playing a game, if you play ball, you play an instrument, at a certain point you have to walk on a bandstand. And we've talked about it, we've heard, now we got to play. And when you get on that bandstand, a lot becomes clear. It's just like, okay, you talk good and you're well dressed and everything, but you can't play. Many times I would be in master classes over the years, and I would get one really contentious student who would talk a lot, just aggravate me. Finally, over the years, I developed a technique where I say, look, we could argue about this all day, but do you have your horn? Or let's play a tune, and then when they start playing, you say, oh, okay, I see. Your art is talking.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with it.
Amazing.
But make sure that your art is not planning. Like you have to plan, but you construct your plan and make it practical, and then begin to execute it. So,
Welcome to a robot dance party.
hey,
So-
Jono he likes that kind of stuff.
If you'd like to ask a question, you can come on up to the mic. I just want to pick us up on where we feel free if anybody wants to come up. I just want to pick up on this kind of notion of innovation and branding for jazz, because I was really struck by this last exchange with Rohit Winton, where you seem frustrated about the branding of jazz.
Yeah, very.
And what I'm struck by is kind of your kind of pride and purity in the spirit of jazz.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, everything has to change and everything has to move and transform itself into a new genre. And so I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, do you view yourself as kind of very true to the spirit of jazz, or do you view yourself as conservative in some basic sense? And how do you take the art to the next level? Because this is the question, this is the question that every person who's running a company thinks about the technological platform they have, they think about their marketing strategy. You know, how do you do that?
Well, I believe in both. You know, I want to hear you talk some more. For me, I believe in both. Like, it's like a game, okay? You dribble a basketball. You can come on and say, but what if we ran with it? We can run with it, but we dribble it.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to dribble between your legs, you want to go behind your back, those fundamentals are the things that allow you to be free. There are certain fundamentals, like of life, let's say. Nature has fundamentals. Your mother is always your mother. Well, why is that? I don't know why. But that's true. When you're 80, your 100-year-old mama is your mama. She's not going to look at you like, well, you're 80 now, you're no longer my son. You will stay inside of your family system. There are certain things about people, human beings, males, females. You can go through, they'll find one culture, someone say, well, it's all kind of a construct. I don't know about that. I don't think it's a construct. Okay, there are many types of people, but there are things that exist. With art forms have an identity. Let's take classical music, for example. The art of orchestration. And you know, you can figure out all kind of stuff to get around that. You can press a button now and you have a string section.
Yeah.
You can press a button and you have trumpets. But that's not like being able to orchestrate. So there are certain fundamentals that cannot change so that everything else can change. And when you mess with those fundamentals, then you're becoming another thing. And if you want to be another thing, that's fine. But in jazz, our fundamentals are so profound and meaningful that why innovate yourself to a weaker position? Many of the innovations in jazz, when you study them, they're like going backwards. So I have to always, like, why would you go from the Model T to the bicycle? Here's my new innovation, a bike. We figured out how to play with each other, how to organize around a form, how to execute melodies and rhythms and harmonies in the context of a movable form. Now you're coming to me telling me you want to play on a vamp in an unmovable form. Well, how is that an innovation? You're telling me you want to go from a drummer interacting with us while we're playing to a drum machine. Why do you want to do that? You're telling me you want to go from this body of material and this information, the blues and all of these things that allow us to communicate with each other, to a repeated melody over and over again in an interminable vamp. How is that? Why? So
Nancy.
So just to offer a historian's perspective on what Winton is saying on this issue of what constitutes a genre in the face of inherent and accelerating turbulence. I have a couple of flashes. One is, if you think about the history of business and art and their intersection, like someone like Josiah Wedgwood, who created pottery that was art, right? Or you think about Tchaikovsky and Stravinsky, right? Kind of rolling slowly into the 21st century and breaking bounds in classical music. Or you think about someone like a newspaper like the New York Times. In the history of all those genres, there are individuals and institutions that, just like Winton, that say, I will lay a stake in the ground on the fundamentals. And my calling is partly about that stake laying. And that's what I think, if I think as a historian you represent. And that's what I think the New York Times represents right now. I actually write for them, and I was saying to Rohit before we started that it's been the most liberating experience for me because they edit me so incredibly diligently, and they're so careful, and their standards are so high. And if you think about someone like Henry Heinz creating the food processing industry, he was going to produce pure food before the FDA, and like Winton, he was going to stand for the fundamentals. I think ultimately it's about the kind of integrity that gets us up in the morning. And for the artist, it's particularly important because you, in a sense, are like a standard bearer for a changing genre. And so it's very, very important. And it's not to be treated lightly or ill-advisedly, as we say in the Anglican, wedding ceremony. But you are part of a historical tradition, right? That's about business and art, and in the case of the New York Times, information provision. And I think it's crucial.
So Nancy, but then how do you resist being labeled conservative?
Well, I mean, some of it is about, you may not be able to, right? Right? Integrity has its costs, right? Integrity has its costs. I think, and putting stakes in the ground is about putting stakes in the ground about yourself, right? It's like reading reviews. Like, who are you? And are you going to be true to yourself in the context of what other people think you should be and want you to be and point fingers at you? I mean, last example. Abraham Lincoln really became a standard bearer for what the United States would be after the crucible of the Civil War. That was a moment of profound transformation for the country. And there was no one in the history of this country that was hated as much as Abraham Lincoln. Not even close. And in the end, the man never slept, so I can't say he got up in the morning. He didn't sleep for 4 years. But in the end, part of it was about this is what this country shall be, and this is where this country came from. And it was fundamental, and the fundamentals were what set that vision free, to use your language, your eloquence.
You know what's that? The quote that Abraham Lincoln had: "Institutions long established shall not be dismantled for light and transient causes." That's right. Okay, and Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural, where I can't quote it exactly, where he said basically, this is the direction we're going in, and if we have to spill blood for every drop of blood that's been spilled by the lash, that's what we're going to have to do. Yeah. And I think that the whole thing of conservative, and for me to make a conservative decision, in my case, it would have been to play instrumental pop music, because that's what everybody was doing. So my decision actually was not conservative. But I feel like when you can't innovate or do anything where there's no center. When the center is, you take children's games. I always would ask kids, hey, y'all want to play a game? Let's not keep score. They always say, what are you talking about? Don't keep score. Man, I don't want to don't keep score. We're not out here to run around. We want to play a game. Somebody's got to lose this game. And it's going to be you. It's got to be a center. And when, like in Yeats's poem, the center cannot hold. Once that center is gone, the falcon really is not going to hit a falconer. We're just out here. Yeah. So I believe in that, and I don't mind. Over the years, I've critiqued me. I don't care. I always say, let's see. I played ball with a guy who, when you play on a team, you're always talking about what you're going to do. And the biggest guy on our team, he was big in country, and he would always make us laugh. So when you would be playing ball, if you got run over on a play, or you dropped a pass, or you missed a crucial shot or something, he would go down the bench. He would get up and walk slowly down the bench where you had your head hanging down. And he would get inside of your helmet and shout into your face as loud as he could scream, "Let's see." Then he would curse you, and he would scream, "Let's see" again. And it made you laugh. Because, let's see. We're out here. So you said you wanted to do this, now you're being critiqued. Oh, it's too bad. That's their right to critique you. Don't step out here if you don't want to be out here. People getting hit out here. Go inside. Mommy can give you some warm milk. And for me, I actually embraced that part of it. Yeah, okay, I'm conservative. I don't have a problem with it. Let's see. Come up here.
Great. Let's have one more question from the crowd.
It's a pleasure to meet everyone.
If you have another question, please just line up behind me.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out today. I guess we often hear sometimes entrepreneurs explain or rationalize their failures in the sense that they might say the market just wasn't ready for their product or their idea. I guess analogously, we also hear at times artists say that the world just wasn't ready for my music yet. Do you think, Wynton, that actually is an acceptable explanation, or do you feel that it's just more or less a excuse saying that they did not roll up their sleeves enough or explore other ways to find success?
I'm just be brief, but I think some people can be successful in their careers and unsuccessful in their lives. And some can, like Johann Bach, we're talking this morning, because he wrote the St. Matthew's Passion, he got demoted. He's the greatest musician in Western music at a boys' school, writing for them. No way they could have been singing his music that well. In his job description, they said, don't write music that's long, don't write music that's too difficult for boys to sing, and don't write music with a lot of ornamentation. He wrote the greatest masterwork in all of Western music, St. Matthew's Passion, and they said, okay, now you just teach math. And, you know, his son brought him the king, whoever it was, and said, well, when the king hears the old man, he's going to know this is the greatest musician in the world. Frederick, I think it was. He heard Bach. He gave Bach some silly test. Of course, Bach turned the music upside down and did the test or whatever it was. And he said, okay, he's good, and gave him something, a dime or something, and said, okay. So they weren't ready for him. You know, sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. But in either case, the question is, are you ready for them? Because, you know, you're dealing with them. So when you're trying to appeal to somebody, it's about them. If you don't care, you can stay home. And sometimes they're not ready for Van Gogh. People weren't ready for him. That's that.
I was just going to say that, yes, that is a common excuse, but at the same time, there are lots of examples of people who have managed to create a market for people for things that weren't culturally at that time acceptable, normative, or even just, you know, thought to have any potential. And that's where I think, again, the artist and entrepreneur has that faith in the vision that they have, in the quote unquote product that they are going to offer, and that's what it is. And like Winton said, people have to be ready for it. The artist and the entrepreneur who really believes in it perseveres and stays at it, and has been able to get that buy-in and move the world with him or her, as opposed to moving with the world and going where they go. And there are examples of people having done that. You know, when Penguin, the publishing company, was first founded, people said, "Who's going to read a book that looks that flimsy?" Even though the idea was the same as that was in the hardcover, but there was this feeling that books are valuable only when in one format, and yet there's an entire whole population that was introduced to reading because of this. And there are various examples where people have been able to create a market, whether it was an artist or an entrepreneur, by sticking at it, by moving the world with them.
So let's take one final question.
Hi, thanks for coming. My name is David. I'm a second-year student at the business school. We learned a lot at the business school that risk-taking and uncertainty is a huge part of innovation. I wanted to know, at such an early age, you know, particularly talked about being 19 and getting your first manager, how did you become comfortable taking risk and sort of managing uncertainty? Thank you.
Well, I mean, for me, I grew up in risk and uncertainty, so I like it. I mean, you know, my daddy was a jazz musician. But I think the thing that stuck in my mind, more stories of my family's life, was always kind of no money, a lot of contention, a lot of kids, had an autistic brother, back when nobody knew what autism was, 5 or 6 of us. And at one point, my father didn't have any work. So we had a family meeting. We had like 3 of those in all of my growing up. So my mother was always arguing about money, we don't have money. So he said he was going to drive a cab. And, you know, we were like, okay, we don't care whether you drive a cab or not. We don't like the music you're playing anyway. But my mother strangely said, no, I don't think you should drive a cab. You know, you wanted to be a musician. So that was strange to us. We were like, well, she always complaining about money. She said, you wanted to be a musician. I think that you should, that's what you do. You know, we living in a family, man, so you don't, it's not like a picture of mother and father that's always like bliss. It's life. So I remember my brothers and I, we looked at each other and said, man, that was kind of strange, wasn't it? I said, Jad, what you think that was about? I said, I don't know. So we didn't contextualize it at that time. But as time passed, I understood it, the need for the meeting and the need for her to tell that to him. That was about the 2 of them. It wasn't about us. We were just there. So that was fine. And another thing is when I went to leave home, once again, contentious, like after I graduate from high school, I'm leaving. I have all my stuff in a box. Got like some jeans, something. I didn't really have nothing. So before I leave, I'm like, okay, I'm check y'all. My daddy said, is that's your stuff? I said, yeah. He said, okay, what you got in the box, man? I said, I got some jeans, He said, yeah, you all right? Yeah, I'm all right. He said, you all right? Yeah, I'm all right. He said, I want you to remember that. No matter what happens to you in your life, you had a box and some jeans, and you were all right. And the last thing he taught me was, when I was a senior in high school, I got a lot of scholarships, not for music. And my teachers were always saying, you don't want to waste your brain on music. We Southern, man, we didn't know about football they like. Don't like music. And everybody was saying, you don't want to go into music because you're going to be like your daddy. You'll struggle your whole life. You won't have nothing. My mom was like, don't go into music. You're going to struggle with music. It's too hard. You know, you can play jazz. I asked my daddy, man, what you think I should do? Everybody was saying, you got to have something to fall back on. You know, you have to have something to fall back on in case you don't make it. Study such. My daddy said, man, the only thing I can tell you is don't have nothing to fall back on.
Oh, yeah. Amen.
All right, this has been truly wonderful, far exceeding, I think, Lori, Mukti, and my expectations, and in large part because of Winton's participation and our faculty members' participation. There's so many lessons about, deep lessons about innovation and entrepreneurship and what we talked about. So I really want to thank Winton, and we look forward to doing this again many times at the Innovation Lab. So thank you.
Thank you. That was terrific. Thank you. Bless you. Bless you.